Welcome, everyone. I'm Sue Dowdell from the Springfield Town Library, and this is Patrice Jones, who is in charge of the Vine Sanctuary, and she's our guru for all things growing. And I'd like to welcome you, and we're going to be using the chat, so please put your information in the chat. Welcome, Patrice.
Hi, thank you, Sue. And thank you, everybody. Before I say anything else, I'm just going to disclose that I'm profoundly camera shy. So Zooming is always a little bit awkward for me, and especially so when I'm mostly talking to black boxes. If there is, I'm also someone who stutters. So if there's a little bit more stuttering than usual, it's just Zoom. Also, if you think you hear someone in the background laughing at me, that's a parrot who likes to mock me, especially when I'm doing Zoom calls. So I am here, and Sue is here, and several of our attendees are here in Springfield, Vermont, which is unceded Abenaki territory, and is also a place, a location where the Abenaki people, and before them the woodland people, grew corn and beans and squash more than 500 years before any Europeans ever came to these shores. And I think that's important to recognize, not only because we should always be aware of our deep history, but also because I was thinking about it, and I was thinking that for those of you who are beginning gardeners, it might be that the most important thing I could give you tonight is not any one of the many pieces of information I'm going to try to make sure I say, but it's a feeling of the courage to just try, and the freedom to make a mistake, and the knowledge that in the trying and the making the mistake, you'll learn something, because people have been growing plants for food here where we are for at least 1,000 years, and people have been growing food from seeds for longer than that, thousands of years around the world, and doing so before there was plastic, before there were garden stores, before there were libraries, and how they did it was by figuring it out along the way. Now, of course, and by improvising. And so I want you to feel free to learn by doing and to improvise in the process, understanding that doing so makes you part of this sort of ongoing interaction between humans and plants that's been going on and will continue to go on for as long as there are humans. Now, of course, since that's such a long history, there are literally 1 bazillion resources that can help you. So I won't begin to be able to say all the things you might want to know, but there are books, so many books. When I started gardening, I had just 1 book and no internet, and I still managed to grow some food to feed myself. The Springfield Town Library has lots of books, so those of us who are local patrons, and I'm sure wherever you are, your local library has lots of gardening books. So that's one resource. Google is, as a company, is probably not your friend, but Google is your friend in terms of getting information about specific things that you might want to know or do when it comes to seeds or to gardening in general. If you just say, how can I do this? Or what am I going to do about this problem? You will undoubtedly find a wealth of information including videos. That was a nice interlude. One of the resources, and videos for those of you, like some people learn better by watching, some people learn better by hearing, by reading, by doing. A lot of people like to see somebody else do something. So there's also a ton of videos that you can find regarding how to start seeds or sow seeds in your garden. I want to make sure I stress, however, one particular resource, and that's the free seed library here at Springfield Town Library. The free seed library at Springfield Town Library. That's a project of Vine Sanctuary in cooperation with Springfield Town Library. I just remembered that I forgot to tell you what is Vine Sanctuary. Vine Sanctuary is an LGBTQ-led refuge for farmed animals that works for social and environmental justice as well as for animal liberation.
Whoa! Oh my God!
Okay, that was not the pattrice. So one of the projects of Vine Sanctuary in coordination with Springfield Town Library is the free seed library at Springfield Town Library. We have seeds, vegetable seeds and flower seeds that you can take and plant in your own garden, and you don't owe anybody anything in response to that.
Restrictions on the governor's health.
Sorry, Patrice, I was trying to mute other people.
Okay, and you muted me. Okay. All right, so I don't know when I got muted. So I'm talking about the free seed library at Springfield Town Library. If you're here in Springfield, you can get seeds for free. You don't have to pay or do anything. We do love it if patrons of the library or other gardeners in our region donate to the library any extra seeds that they have each year. And if they, like me, save seeds each year, to donate some of those to the library, but that's not a requirement. We also have a Facebook group called Free Seed Library. And you don't need to be a local patron to join that. You can join that group, and if in the course of your adventures in seed starting and gardening this year, you come up with a question, you can ask it, and undoubtedly one of the many expert gardeners who are members of that group will give you some advice. Okay, so we said that we would be talking about why you should start garden plants from seeds, where to get seeds, how to choose varieties, how to find or make your supplies, and then how to actually start or sow the seeds. So let's look at each of those in turn. Starting, now you might be thinking, if you haven't gardened at all, well, what else would I do other than start from seeds? But it's possible to buy seedlings, and we'll talk about where to do that locally in a minute, for many popular garden plants. But then you're limited to the varieties that are on offer near you. And so if you want yellow tomatoes, but nobody's offering yellow tomatoes, you're out of luck. Or if you would like to try some fancy variety of something else, and they're not offering seedlings, you're out of luck. If, like me, you prefer mustard greens to kale, you're going to have to start those from seeds yourself, because hardly anybody ever offers those as seedlings. But it's also a matter of the fact that some plants can't be started from seedlings. Some you have to actually start from seeds. Those are root crops, like beets and carrots. Those you really pretty much have to put in the ground yourself from seeds. And then other plants like peas and beans, You can start them, and we'll talk a little bit about how to start them early, but for the most part, those go right into the ground. And then finally, it's just a feeling of sufficiency to go from a seed to a plant to a fruit, and then maybe save some of those seeds from that fruit and then plant them the next year. There's just a feeling of being part of the whole cycle. It's fun. And it's also going to allow you, if you want to go that far, to actually even develop your own varieties of seeds. So those are some of the reasons why you might choose to start seeds. And if you missed it, Sue had said, please do share comments or questions in the chat. So please do that if questions come up. And if I say something that you really didn't understand and you would like me to repeat, and that's not the kind of thing you want to wait till the end to ask, you can probably use the reactions to raise your hand, and then we could clear up whatever the confusion is. Okay, so where to get seeds? I'm going to assume that everybody knows you can use mail order to buy seeds from anywhere you like. I'll give a shout out to our local High Mowing Seeds here in Vermont, who not only provide organic seeds, but also do a lot of donating of seeds to organizations. So we feel, including our free seed library. Locally here in Vermont, or here in Southern Vermont, here in Springfield, we can get seeds at the co-op, we can get seeds at Bibbins, we can get seeds at Erskine's, and further afield, Allen Brothers, Garden Supply Company, which is another national Vermont brand. But maybe you don't want to buy them, or maybe the reason that you want to grow food is to save money, and so you'd be interested in where do you get seeds for free. So if you're local, free seed library, join the Facebook group, tell us what you want, I'll try to make sure that we get them. If you're not local, there may be a free seed library near you. So you might want to look around for one, but if you can't find one, then message me or post something in our free seed library Facebook page, and I will do my best to find a free seed, a seed library near you, if there is one. Also, there are a number of online seed sharing networks, and very frequently people don't require you to have seeds to give. They're happy to just mail them to you. So those are some of the places that you can get seeds. Next, if you look at a seed catalog, or even come to the free seed library, you will immediately see that there are numerous what we call varieties of the different kinds of plants, right? So there are, I don't even know, dozens, maybe hundreds of varieties of lettuce, of carrots, etc. And so it may be a question for you, how do I choose which ones? Obviously, the taste or the color or whatever it is that's making you want to grow things may be decisive for you. I personally started gardening because I craved the taste of tomatoes from when I was a kid, and I couldn't ever, even at farmers markets, get that flavor. And I also craved a kind of corn that is widely grown where I grew up, but was not grown where I was going to graduate school. And so it was really the wish for those flavors that got me started about 30 years ago. So that may be true for you. There may be something that you just want. You may want what's easy to grow. And there are varieties of different plants that are more fussy and others that are more easy. And usually you will see on the seed packet or in the seed catalog some indication that this is an easy to grow plant. Conversely, if it's a particularly fussy or hard to grow plant, that'll usually be noted too. So if you're a beginner, you may want to start with the really easy things. Some things that are super easy and pretty reliable for everybody are radishes, and kale is really hardy, and once it gets going is very hard to kill. Beans, once you get them started, are pretty easy. In terms of flowers, sunflowers are super easy and are also very, very helpful to our bird friends and our bee friends. So those are ones that we suggest. Sue, if you're still here, I see that someone is in the waiting room.
Okay,
I lost my train of thought. Okay, so how easy something to grow is, whether you just want it, but then there are the constraints of reality. And the constraints of reality have to do with how much space you have and where you are growing. Here in Vermont, we have a short growing season. And so you're gonna have to grow the kinds of plants that mature more quickly. For almost any kind of vegetable, there will be a range of weeks even between when you start the seed and when you can actually expect something that you could eat. And usually that will appear on seed packets as days to maturity or days to maturation. Or sometimes they'll just say 78 days. And you'll have to know that why they're saying a number of days is that that's the number of days you can count on it taking. And even things that are easy like radishes, some are so fast that you can get some within 21 days, and others take literally months, like big daikon radishes. So you're going to want to look at that, especially if you're in a short season place like Vermont. The other big piece is how much space do you have to garden? Some plants grow what they call compactly. Other plants sprawl all over the place. When it comes to beans and peas and cucumbers, there are two different varieties, what they call a bush variety, which grows, you've got a central stem and then it bushes out and it'll come up to knee high or maybe even waist high. But then you have vining or pole varieties, and those are meant to be grown up a fence or a trellis. And there you'll have a long vine that may go 6 feet or taller. So you're gonna want to choose for all of your plants. If you've got a small space, then you're gonna look for that word compact or small space to choose something like which variety of broccoli you're going to choose. And then for your beans and your peas, you're going to think, do I want bush variety or do I want pole variety? I'm a big believer in pole variety because it extends what you can do. You can use fences, you can make trellises, which you can just make them out of tree branches. Or anything that you can find that plants could grow up. And then you use a very small amount of actual ground by growing things vertically. So that's something to really pay attention to. Because if you try to grow a bush variety up a pole, it's not going to work. And this is where, if we were in person, I just want to acknowledge this is where I would say, okay, any questions? And you could ask any questions that you had before we moved on. And so I appreciate your patience with the Zoom format that we are having to deal with because of the ongoing pandemic, but which also allows us to have people from Scotland joining us. So that's pretty excellent.
So Patrice, there were a couple of questions that you might want to address right now.
Beautiful.
One person had asked if there's going to be a list of available seeds in the seed library.
Mhm.
And I did say that that would be posted onto the Facebook group. I've
Yeah,
been sharing the Facebook group
good.
as in the chat as we've gone along. And I think that there was another question is, do you have to live in Springfield to get the seeds from the free seed library at our library? And I said that you would be mailing them out to anybody in Vermont. Is that accurate?
What we're gonna, so yes, first,
Okay.
I'm in the process of doing an inventory, and I'm gonna list what we already have on hand, but I'm also gonna use that there are some things I know we need, so I'll be ordering those this week. But that's why I said, if you're in Springfield and there's something special you want, make sure you do a post in the Free Seed Library Facebook group so that I see that and I know it when I'm ordering seeds. In terms of getting seeds from our free seed library, yes, we're going to do curbside pickup here. If you're here in Springfield and you're able, if you're here in Springfield and you're not able, maybe I'll bring them to you. And if you're further afield in Vermont, we can mail them to you. If you're out of state, again, if there's something that you want, but you don't know where to get it where you are, let me know where you are. And you might also, if you have like a really special request, you can just post about that in the Free Seed Library, because there are people in the Facebook group who are seed savers like me. And so you might be outside of Vermont and want something that I have in my personal collection. And if that's true, I'll mail it to you. So that is the answer to all of those questions. And if for whatever reason you can't follow the link by Zoom to the Free Seed Library group, you can just go onto Facebook and type in Free Seed Library and we come up as the first search result. Okay. I meant to also mention, just for the new gardeners who are local, you may want to buy seedlings as well as seeds. And if you want to do that, the absolute best place to do it is at farmers markets. The Brattleboro Farmers Market in particular always has a really wide variety. Here locally, right in Springfield, Bibbins usually has seedlings, but they are not organic. If you drive down Route 5, both Allen Brothers and Harlow Farms have seedlings at the beginning of gardening season every year. Okay, how to choose varieties. Okay, now we come to the supplies you're going to need, how to find those, how to make those, and then we'll move on to actually putting the seeds into either the ground or a container. So if you're going to be starting seeds inside, you're going to need some kind of container for, well, some kind of containers, plural, for the seeds that you're going to start. You're going to need a source of light. And you're going to need some kind of clear cover for when you first put the seeds in before they emerge, to keep the soil damp. If you buy seed starting supplies, which we'll talk about where, you often can buy flat things with then clear lids. And this can be done online as well. But it's also possible just to use any kind of clear cling wrap, or if you save clear plastic that you've gotten. I save any plastic of that kind all year long to use. So the real question, usually for people, the two big questions are lights and containers. So containers, you can buy, if you are buying them, you can buy plastic or biodegradable, made of peat or other biodegradable materials, at most garden centers, at most hardware stores, online, at most farm stores. Here in Springfield, there's Bibbins. In Chester, there's Erskine's. And then there's Allen Brothers and Gardner Supply further afield. But wherever you live, there's going to be some place that you could go. And if there's not, then online. But if you're like me and you're freegan, then you want to make or use containers from found materials in a process that's called upcycling. So what works? Well, if you think about it, what you need is a container of some kind, and it needs to have some drainage holes at the bottom, and it needs to be capable of holding something that's damp, not sopping wet, because we're going to talk about the fact that you need your soil is going to be damp at all times, but not sopping wet. So it needs to be able to hold damp soil, and it needs to have some drainage. If you just think, well, of course, you might have some flower pots around. You might have some containers that you got some previous year when you bought plants of some kind. So all of those can be reused. You want to wash them in nice hot water first. You might have a collection of planters. You can use those. But you might also look in your recycling. And I use soy milk containers, the thick waxy containers that are sort of square, and I just cut the top off of it. And oh, here's one like this. Ooh, can you see it? Yeah. So I just cut the top off of a container, and I'll poke a few holes in the bottom when I use it. Anything that you can find that is square or round and you can poke holes in the bottom, like I use old soy yogurt containers, anything like that will work. You can also, and this is totally groovy, you can actually make your own little seedling pots out of newspaper or out of that brown paper that you're constantly getting in packages and that you would normally just take to the recycling center. And that's the kind of thing that I can describe, but it's going to be very hard it may be hard for you to envision. And things tend to go blurry when you move your hands around on Zoom. It's mostly a matter of making strips of paper and then using something like a can to roll them and then folding the bottom, and then you're set. It's so easy to do. And I put a link in the Free Seed Library group today that you can follow to look at pictures of someone doing this. But if you don't want to do that, you can just Google make plant pots out of newspaper, and you will find like 25 videos and 100 web pages showing you how to do this. It's a wonderful way to make plant containers that are biodegradable. You can just plant the whole thing rather than messing with the soil, messing with the roots of your plants by pulling them out of a pot. You can just plant the whole thing and it'll degrade in the garden.
Patrice, can we stop for a minute and answer some questions?
Absolutely.
So someone had said, will you talk about produce that will do well in container gardening?
Okay.
Okay. I don't know if that's going to be part of it later on. Somebody had asked about whether RVTC, the Tech Center horticultural class, still sells seedlings. And then what's your opinion on grow plugs versus starter mix?
Great.
Okay.
Yes. I'm just writing down the questions so I don't forget them. So we're still on where to get supplies. And so one of those supplies is also going to be some sort of medium in which to plant the seeds. If seeds that you're sowing directly into the garden, of course, will just go into your garden soil. But what about, as someone has just asked, the seed starting mix? So what about the soil? So there are two things you can do. One is you can buy some sort of seed starting mix, which is generally peat moss with some wetting agent. You can also just, if you're feeling really competent, you could make your own seed starting mix by getting some potting soil and then adding some aerating and moisture holding things, but that's probably too advanced to talk about how to do that. I would also say that I use, when it comes to starting mix, I go with black gold, which is available here locally at Bibbins. But you can also buy these little what are called grow plugs, and basically what they are, if you've never seen them, they come in these flat, they look like big coins, and then you put them in water and they puff up, and each one is, well, they come in different sizes, but they're about the right size to start a seedling and then pop it into the ground. I use both. So I do not have skin in the grow plugs versus starter mix wars. I know that there are some people who feel really strongly about only one or only the other. For me, I use starter mix for things that are bigger plants like tomatoes. We're going to talk about the process of starting it and then moving it to a larger container. So if I need large containers, I'm going to use starter mix. But for some plants are particularly finicky about their roots being disturbed. Beans and peas in particular really don't like their roots to be disturbed at all. And so if I want to get a jump on the season by starting them indoors rather than sowing them directly into the ground in early spring, then I will use the plugs because then I can just pop the plug right into the ground. I also just always keep some of the plugs on hand because they're really easy to use, and they're just handy to have. They do tend it's very easy to get them too wet, and they'll go a bit moldy if you do that. So the main problem with the main thing with the plugs is making sure not to saturate them, which you might be tempted to do because you have to put them in water to help them grow. I hope that answered the question. Yeah. I would be looking to see if you were nodding, if I could see you. What else did I want to say about, we'll come back to the soil question when we're talking about the actual process of starting the seeds. But we have to talk first about light, and we have to talk about when to start or sow. So light, that's going to be your biggest challenge if you're starting seeds inside. It's pretty hard to do unless you have a solarium or a greenhouse or some sort of artificial lights. Even if you've got a sunny windowsill, that's usually not quite enough light. And you'll notice that your plants aren't getting enough light if they start to get what we call leggy, meaning they get really spindly and tall because they're reaching for the sun. rather than nice and compact and bushy. So unless you're super lucky in the setup of your house in terms of sources of lights, or you have a greenhouse already on your property, you probably are looking at buying lights if you are going to start a lot of seeds inside. And those can be purchased at most garden centers. They can be purchased online. I have noticed that since a certain plant that used to be illegal is now legal a lot of places, a lot more people are growing that plant. And what it has meant is there's an explosion of availability of all kinds of lights for growing inside, and they've become a lot more affordable than they used to be. So that is lights. I would say you could probably get away with, I have gotten away with starting something like peas a couple weeks early on a sunny windowsill. But if you're thinking about starting something like tomatoes, which are going to be in your house for a long time before you start to bring them outdoors, then you're probably going to need to buy some kind of lights. Next is, when are you going to do this? And I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to give my apologies to, there we go. Okay, I'm going to give my apologies to people who are elsewhere. So what we have here is the handouts that Sue is giving you. And what I've done here is go through various gardening books that have dates listed, and selected out the dates for here in southern Vermont. And so it probably would work for southern New Hampshire as well. But if you're elsewhere, then these dates are really not going to be applicable to you. And what you're going to need to do is find a map online. If you just say, what gardening zone am I in? What will pop up are some options for you to go to a map that's a national map, and that shows the whole country in different bands of color. And you'll be able to find out which gardening zone you're in. Then when you find out what gardening zone you're in, you will be able to either one by looking at seed packets, or even better, by getting a gardening book out of your local library. You'll be able to find a list that tells you when it's safe to put plants in the ground. Now, so what I did to come up with this list was count backwards from those dates, the number of weeks that it takes something to mature. You won't have to do that complicated math, because you'll be able to find something like this handout for your gardening zone too, I'm sure. So in the handouts for the local folks, we have two of them. One is this one, where if you look down the side, you'll be able to see the kind of vegetable. And then some of them, when you would start it indoors, if you're starting it out indoors, and when you would sow it directly in the soil, if you're sowing it directly in the soil. And then if you've started it indoors, when you would actually plant it in the garden, when you would plant the seedling in the garden. Or if you bought seedlings, when you would plant the seedling in the garden. So here we have, yes.
Patrice, there's a question as to what zone are we in Springfield?
I think it's 5, but I like, that's not in my head anymore. I'm so sorry to say, but it's really easy to look up.
Okay. And I did share links to the 2 handouts that you're showing. They're in the chat, but they'll also be in the Free Seed Library Facebook group.
Beautiful. So if you're using this, What you're going to find out is when you would start the seeds if you're starting them indoors, when you would sow them directly if you're sowing them directly in the garden, and when, if you buy seedlings or you have your own seedlings because you started them indoors, when you would actually put them into the garden. And then the other handout is pretty much the same information. I hope it's going to let me share. Okay, did it switch for you? Or is it the same one?
It's the same one.
Okay, I have to figure out. Okay.
I think you have to.
Share. There we go. Stop share, and then I'll share the new one. Okay, and this one is much the same information, but I find it really useful to have a garden schedule, a schedule of things that I know I need to do. And so if you are, and again, this is for our region, but you might want to use this as a model for yourself. I just find it so useful when I'm trying to juggle in my head which things I need to do when, to just sit down and write it all out for myself. So you might want to use this as a model. And this just tells you what you would do, whether it's time to start the cucumbers, it's time to sow the beets, etc. By start, I mean start indoors. By sow, I mean put directly in the ground. And by plant, I mean transplant. Okay? One big caveat, not just for my handouts, but for any of these things that you find in books or online about what you should do when for your gardening zone, whatever it might be. There is snow in Texas right now. We are in the midst of climate change. And the weather is no longer as predictable as it used to be. It was never perfectly predictable. You would always sometimes have a late frost or an early frost, etc. But things are really out of whack now. This past year here in Vermont, it started out looking like it was going to be an early spring, and then we had a sudden snowfall and cold snap due to the polar vortex again. So I wish that it wasn't true, but it is true. And so what this means is that we gardeners have to be prepared to be even more flexible and even more improvisational than we used to be. It's not possible to say, okay, I'm going to be safe if I wait until this time to put this in, and it's not going to freeze, because maybe it will. And so pay attention to the actual forecasts for your area. If the list that you have wherever you might live tells you that it's safe to put certain things into the ground on this particular date, but the forecast is telling you that the polar vortex is coming for us again, then hold off. Or maybe start even more seeds. That's what I did. And now I just make sure that I have extras so that if I lose plants due to a weather mishap, at least early in the season, then I can replant. And you may want to try and take advantage of the fact that spring is coming a little earlier. For some people, summer is lasting a little longer. For others, it's the opposite. And so you might want to try growing something that you didn't used to be able to grow in your region, because maybe now it's possible. Okay, that is a disheartening thing to have to say. So let me also say that you're helping with global warming by gardening. Any plants that you grow yourself and eat yourself are going to have a lower carbon footprint than anything that has been shipped or trucked to you from elsewhere. The more fruits and vegetables you eat, of course, all of us here at the sanctuary are vegan, and we hope everybody would be. But certainly the more fruits and vegetables you eat instead of animal products are going to reduce your carbon footprint considerably. You're going to be reducing, if you grow beans, for example. Oh, beans are just the most beautiful plants for us in terms of the amount of protein per acre that they provide for us while using very little water. So it's not anywhere near what we all need to be doing. But if you begin growing some of your foods yourself, and upping your consumption of fresh produce, that's going to be good for your own health, but it's also going to be good for the health of the planet. So now we come to the hardest question of all: how do we start these seeds, or sow these seeds? So the first thing I'm going to say is that no matter how you're doing it, whether you're putting a seed directly into the ground or you're putting a seed into a container that you're going to grow inside for a while and eventually put into the ground, some things are the same inside or outside. One of those is that so you've got a seed and you've got earth, soil. And that soil might be garden soil, or it might be some sort of planting medium in some sort of container or plug. And the question then becomes, well, how deep do I put this seed in? And the answer is that probably you'll find that answer on your seed packet. It's going to vary from seed to seed. But if you don't have a seed packet, you can still find out. And not just because you could look it up online, but you could also use the rule of thumb, which is this: the smaller the seed is, the less soil that it tends to need on top of it. Okay? The smaller the seed is, the less soil that it's going to need on top of it. So something very tiny, like a lettuce seed, or even smaller than a lettuce seed, like a mustard seed, that's only going to need like 1/4 or even sometimes only 1/8 of an inch of soil over it. These are plants that seed themselves by just dropping the seed on the ground. It just sits there and it will grow the next year. So you're replicating that. That's what you're doing with all of these seeds. Plants grew themselves long before people started growing plants, and how plants grow themselves is by spreading the seed, and then the seed goes into the ground, and then some processes over the time period between when the seed drops and when it sprouts the next year buries it a little bit. So you're just replicating that, except you're not a bird or a squirrel, you're a Homo sapien. And so the tiny seeds need very little, and then the larger the seed is, normally the more deeper it needs to go. So that big pumpkin seeds or bean seeds often need a 1/2 inch or even a whole inch down. So that's one thing to think of. Consult your seed packet. If you can't consult your seed packet, you might want to look online, or you could just wing it with the idea that a big seed needs to go down more than a 1/2 inch, and a little seed only needs probably 1/4 of an inch of covering over it. Next, this is kind of important. What I call it the rule of threes. A lot of times people who are beginning gardeners, they use one seed for each plant they want, but not every single seed will germinate. So what you want to do in general is plant 3 seeds for every one you want. Plant 3 seeds for every one that you're hoping to get, because then you're going to end up with what you need. Once they emerge, and if all 3 have emerged, then you clip the two weakest ones and let the stronger one grow. And I say clip them because you don't want to pull them out, because if you pull them out, then you're disturbing the root system. Okay, right. And just in general, whenever you're thinning plants, you want to snip rather than pull. For tiny, tiny, tiny seeds, you might want to do something called broadcasting, rather than trying to count out 3 teeny tiny little seeds for every plant you want. And so for that, you could do it in a spot on the garden, but you could also do it in a flat, and you just sort of spread the seeds over, lightly cover them. They'll come up wherever they come up, and then again, you use your snipping to then have the ones you want equally spaced from each other. You want to make sure, whether it's inside or outside, that the soil is damp, but not sopping wet. In between, you don't want it to just be lightly damp. You want it to be fully damp, but you don't want it to be sopping wet. You don't want it to be so that if you squeezed it, water would come out. Also, do not squeeze wet soil, because that messes with the soil structure. Soil is a living organism. It has air, as well as minerals. And if you scrunch it when it's wet, then you can destroy the soil structure. So this is just a little tip. Don't ever dig in your garden when it's really wet, because then you can really mess up the soil. Okay, so that then leads me to remind you, or to tell you, so if those were the things that happen indoors or outdoors. So now if we're indoors and we've got our seed starting mix and we've got our pots, so now we've got to get the seed starting mix into the pots. And the 2 ways to do it are put it in dry and then gradually add water, or that's great. It also can get really messy. So another thing to do is put the soil like in a bucket and get it to that right wetness, and then very lightly transfer it to your containers. But if you do that, you have to be really super careful not to smosh it down, because again, a soil has air in it, and the plants actually need the air to breathe. That's why you don't see plants on like a path that people have trod down. It's because there's no more air for them. Okay, so you've put your medium into the pots, you've put the seed in at the right depth. Then what you're going to do is cover it up with either a plastic lid of some sort or plastic wrap of some sort, so that it maintains its moisture. You don't want it to get so, like if you start to see like actually drops of water on the roof that you have created, that's too wet, and you're going to want to lift that off and let it air out a bit. But you want it to be moist in there, and you keep that lid on there until the plants begin to emerge. I don't know why I'm just suddenly telling you this now. It's out of space, but I want to tell you, I meant to tell you this when I was saying 3 for every one you want. So your seeds are going to have variable rates of germination depending on how fresh they are. You can use old seeds, but every year that a seed gets older, the less percentage of the seeds will actually germinate. Some seeds are particularly hard to germinate, and bean and pea seeds can be that. And so there's a product called inoculant. It's actually just bacteria that you can dust onto pea or bean seeds and considerably increase the likelihood that they actually will sprout. It's spelled INOCULANT, inoculant. Or if you wanted to Google it, just say, what do I put on bean seeds to make them sprout? And that'll come up. I'm going to try and get us inoculant for the free seed library, but it's super cheap and easy to get, and you can usually get it at any garden store, and you can also get it online. Okay, so your seeds have emerged. You're going to be using either the handout I gave you or a gardening book or handout for your region to let you know how long you have to wait between when it emerges and when you can actually put it into the ground. But there's one more thing that you have to do between growing your plants inside and putting them in the ground, and that is called hardening. When you're growing your plants inside, they don't have any, there's no wind, and the light that they're getting is much more filtered, even if you've bought really good lights, than full sun at midday. And so what you're going to need to do is get your plants used to being outside. And you'll do that by starting no less than a week before you put them in the ground. I'd even go 2 weeks if you can. Myself, as soon as it's warm enough to start putting them out, I start putting them out a little bit. And what you want to do is you start putting them out for just a little bit of time a day. And the first few times you put them out, you put them in a shady spot so that they don't have full sun yet. It doesn't have to be heavily shaded, but you don't want to have them out at noon in the full sun, or the plants are going to get scalded. That won't kill them necessarily, but it'll stunt their growth a bit. So you want to take them out, say in the early morning for an hour or two, and then bring them back in, and then gradually take them outside for longer and longer time until they are hardened off and they can be outside all the time. And once they can be outside all the time, then all you have to do is wait until you know it's safe in terms of frost and soil temperature to put them in the garden. Those were all the things that I wrote down I wanted to make sure I said, and I know we have a ton of questions. So Sue, do you want to let me know about questions?
Sure, absolutely. So the question about produce that does well in container gardening.
Oh, right, I forgot that one.
That's okay.
Thank you. Thank you. So if when we were talking about like, how do you choose what variety to grow? There are plants that are particularly good for container gardens. Now you can try anything in a container garden. You don't have to grow the special varieties. I don't know how many times I've just had extra plants and ended up growing them in containers, and they work just fine. But usually you're going to want compact plants, and very frequently plants that do well in container gardens will actually say on the seed packet that this is good for container gardens. If you're looking at a seed catalog, and here's a tip, you can look at seed catalogs. You don't have to necessarily buy from that catalog, but the seed catalogs, and they're all online now too, almost all will like have a section of good for container plants. And so choose among those. And also, I just want to make a pitch for asking people. People love to talk about their gardens, and it's a way to do something that we really need to do these days, which is to rebuild our communities. And like the weather, your garden is something that you can actually talk to anybody about, regardless of other differences that you might have. And so, you know, if you're interested in a container garden and there's some neighbor near you who you see has a lovely container garden, find some way to ask them their advice on container gardening, because that's the other thing. Gardeners love to give advice. So, you know, ask the people in your area, wherever it might be. Here in Springfield, of course, I hope you're going to join the Free Seed Library Facebook group, but there's local groups. In your friend group, there may be gardeners, but I really want to stress trying to talk as safely as we can right now, because we have to be physically distanced from each other. But, you know, masked up and 6 feet away, try and find ways to ask people in your community which varieties of tomatoes grow best in your community. Does everybody have the same problem with cucumbers this year? Often they do. Is there blight this year? There are many, many things to talk about, and it's a really wonderful way to actually talk about something that we can all agree on, right? We can all agree that gardening is good. We can all agree that eating fresh produce is healthy. And we can all agree that everybody should have access to that produce. So we can talk about gardens. And so I really encourage you, if you have questions, not only to use these online resources, but to talk to people who garden in your community.
Okay, so we don't know about RVTC horticultural.
I do not know that.
Yeah, we don't know that. Somebody wanted to know about squash and squash bug remediation and how do you get rid of your squash bugs without using pesticides and whatnot. We don't want to do that.
Right, right. Well, gosh, that's a
Is that a whole new
it really,
conversation?
It really is. I mean, we probably should have a session maybe closer to growing season where we where we have a whole session on common garden problems. And we can make sure that several experienced gardeners are there. I mean, with squash bugs, you can pick them off. Sometimes you can even sort of can actually cut a little, if they're getting into the stem, you can actually cut and pull them out sometimes. If you know that squash bugs are a problem, you can make little, I can't think of the right word, something that's wrapped around the plant essentially, that'll still allow it to grow, but that'll keep the plant bug out.
Are there plants that you can plant near the squash that will ward them off?
Well,
see, I don't know about these things, but I'm asking the question.
Right. Well, for one, I am a huge believer in marigolds all through the garden. Okay, marigolds all through the garden. They help they have beneficial nematodes on their roots, and they're extremely fragrant in a way that sometimes I've actually seen them attract bugs that would otherwise be eating your plants, but they can also confuse plants that might otherwise be eating your plants. One big thing that I always recommend is not just marigolds everywhere, though I'm really big on that. Grow some edible flowers, like nasturtiums are beautiful and also tasty. Grow herbs, grow smelly things, because and then break up your plants. Like instead of growing like all your squashes together and then all your tomatoes together. So if you grow all your squashes together, then here comes the squash bug, and as soon as it's done with one, it moves right on to the next and right on to the next. But if you have your squashes spread out, mixed up with the other plants, if you have your tomatoes spread out, mixed up with other plants, and you've got herbs and marigolds in between them all, then it's not as easy for an insect that that likes only one kind of plant to make its way through all of your plants of that kind. And the same thing with disease. If some kind of disease hits one of your tomatoes and all your tomatoes are together with their leaves touching, then that's going to make it really easy for it to go all the way through. Less so if you've got them spread out and other things are dividing them.
Okay.
Wait, there was one more thing.
Okay.
And that is anything that you can do to build a healthy, diverse ecosystem in your garden that will attract beneficial insects, such as ladybugs, then and dragonflies. Then you're gonna have some help, and that's why I said sunflowers. Look, birds eat insects. You invite the birds to your garden. They're gonna do some of the work for you.
Okay, so somebody had asked to talk about herbs, and she didn't specify what that was specific question was about, though.
Okay, well, herbs, they really, really vary. Like, so some herbs are just so easy, not just to plant, but to propagate even after you've planted. So basil, for example, is very easy, comes up so reliably. And then I don't know if you know this, but any plant in the mint family, and you can tell the mint family because they all have square stems. Any plant in the mint family, you can propagate by cutting it off. So like, here's the plant, and you cut, and you take the top that you cut off and you put it in some water and it will root. So, if you've got 6 basil plants at the beginning of your season, once they're adult, you can do a little trimming of them and then end up with 12 basil plants pretty easily.
Okay.
But other herbs are like parsley take forever. Like, parsley is so hard to germinate. It's so hardy once it gets going, but it's so slow to germinate. So I would really say for herbs, you really want to look at that seed packet and maybe even look up some online advice for that particular herb.
Okay, so somebody had asked, when you have directly sowed your seeds, how do you protect them from small rodents? I guess this person had a problem with their small rodents, or their rodents digging up their seed.
That's not a problem that I've had.
Okay.
So I can't speak to that except to say I can look it up. If you ask that question in the Facebook group, I can go look it up in my different books, and I might have some.
Okay. So when you use the product that, the black, all the little spaces that you put them all in, and the plastic on top, so you can tell I'm not a gardener. That's my husband. So once the seedlings start to sprout, do you take the clear plastic part off?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Once they've sprouted, you're going to need to lift that up. But here's the other thing I should have mentioned. So some of your plants, like a lettuce plant, and you started in a smallish, maybe you made your own out of newspaper pot, and now your lettuce is growing, it's going to be fine. By the time it's outgrowing its pot, it's going to be time to put it in the garden. But some plants that we start from seed only because they take so long and our season is so short, right? So like, if you live in a warm place, you could direct sow your tomatoes or your peppers or your eggplants, but our season doesn't allow that. By the time the soil is warm enough to direct sow, it's not going to have a long enough time. So those plants, we have to start inside: peppers, eggplants, tomatoes. And they'll start out small, but then they're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so unless you've started them in a giant pot that's big enough for them, what you're going to need to do is pop them out of that small cell. That's what they're called, I think, the black plastic. Pop it out of that cell and into a larger pot. Yeah.
Okay. So Dallas had posted that she just posted an ask in her Buy Nothing group, asking for a neighbor to have a conversation about the topic. So that particular group, the Buy Nothing project, she said, was a good resource for aid,
Right.
support,
Yep.
seeds, gear.
Absolutely.
And I think our final question is, should we till the garden space every year.
Ah, okay. Yeah, we're getting into all the controversial topics. Okay. So this is a question that expert gardeners disagree with each other about. And so I can't claim that there's one right answer. I can tell you that I started out turning over the earth every year, and even doing what they call double digging, which is, let's just say you dig really deeply, and it's a lot. It's exercise, with the idea of loosening the soil so that the roots can grow down. Because what's happening with your soil is it's a really complex organism that includes minerals and animals, including insects. So many insects you can't even, there's amazing insects that have different things they do that turn compost into minerals, and as I said, air and water, and your plant is growing through it. It's got sensors essentially on the root tips, and the root tips are reaching down and reaching out in search of water, in search of nutrients. And so you need the soil to be fluffy enough for roots to make themselves through. Now, of course, we all know, we've seen weeds growing in the highway, so plants are pretty tough about being able to worm their roots through. But you're trying to grow lush plants that will produce enough food for you to eat, so you want them to have everything that they need, and that means a nice fluffy soil that's filled with worms and other insects. And so some people feel that digging hurts that. And this, if you've dug, I mean, you've probably accidentally, killed a worm while digging. And so I have tried these past few years a process that's called no dig gardening, where every year you layer more and more compost and dead leaves, etc., and you plant in that top layer of things, rather than digging into the soil. Or if you dig in, you only dig in enough to just put that little plant in or put that little seed in. That's what I've been doing for the past 3 or 4 years now. And I will report that here in Vermont, and where I am in Vermont, which is halfway up a mountain, so it's thin mountain soil, very rocky, the difference that it has made in my soil fertility has just been extraordinary. I have gone and every once in a while just got a trowel full just to see, and what's underneath is so much richer and writhing with worms than it ever was when I was digging. So I'm sold on not digging every year, but I'm not going to fight you if you're someone who wants to dig.
Okay, so someone's following up and saying, could I leave the leaves till in my garden, and can I leave torn up cardboard that's been left as cover over the winter, and what other things can be mixed in? I think you kind of answered that.
I mean, your cardboard should be fine. Brown paper and cardboard, you can use those as brown material in compost, so they're going to break down. I wouldn't put wood chips in, because they take a really long time to break down, and so they're going to be leaching nutrients in their process of breaking down. So I'd keep them out of the garden. Grass clippings are fine. Tree leaves in the fall are fine. In fact, I gather as many as I can and pile them under the garden every year. If I have neighbors who are rakers and for some reason don't want their leaves, which is always amazing to me, I ask them for them and I dump them in my garden too, as long as I don't think they've been using chemicals. Anything that is going to break down quickly is going to be good for your garden. I tend to chop up. If you have any diseased plants in your garden, you want to get them out. But I had nice healthy corn this year, so at the end of the season, I chopped up those corn stalks and spread them out to let them degrade over the winter.
Okay. All right, and we're getting some thank yous. I'm just going to share my screen for some programs that we have coming up, just to let everybody know. Let me see, there we go. So we've got, next week, we've got Black Presence at the Battle of Bennington. We have a program from the Black River Action Team on bug hunting. There's a program, craft program coming up. There's a Healthy Forest, Healthy Rivers, again from Black River Action Team. And then we have a ultimate presentation for the Red Sox Nation. So if you're following us on Eventbrite, you can find those programs coming up. Thank you very much, Patrice, and most of everybody that wanted to join the Free Seed Library, I've approved. That came from this group. So we look forward to having you again and seeing everybody on the Free Seed Library.
Great. And shout out to Black River Action Team. I'm so glad they're a wonderful local nonprofit for anybody who doesn't already support them.
Absolutely. They're a good partner. All right. So thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Trying to get off. There we go.